Hey everyone, Valentine's Day is right around the corner, so I thought, why not talk about sex today? I mean, a lot of you are thinking about sex anyway, right? If we're honest about it. And what I found over the years, many couples, especially Christian couples, have questions about what is acceptable and what's not acceptable sexually within the marriage. And for a lot of couples, this becomes a point of contention and even division. So in today's video, what I want to do is I want to look at 4 areas of the relationship: anal sex, oral sex, pornography, and toys, and approach them both from a biblical standpoint if you're a person of faith, and from a secular wisdom standpoint if you're not a person of faith. That's what we're going to talk about today on Relationship. Welcome to Relationships. My name's Eric Wooten. If this is your first time hanging out with us, welcome to the place to get practical relationship advice that actually works in your relationship. If you've not already done so, go ahead and click the subscribe button and the bell notification so you don't miss upcoming videos. If you want a free guide to intimacy, you can click the link in the description area below. And if you and your partner need help in the area of communication, I've got a phenomenal communication course, an online course with 19 videos and tons of worksheets. You can get more information about that in the description area below as well. All right, let's talk about sex. I don't know about you, but whenever I hear that, the 1990s Salt and Pepper song starts ringing in my head. No, just me? Okay, focus. So, listen, sex. Many couples struggle to talk about or find agreement in this area. And over the years, working with premarital couples, married couples, specifically the idea of what is acceptable and what's not acceptable in the marriage relationship is a topic that comes up over and over and over again. There's a lot of different beliefs, a lot of different thoughts, a lot of disagreement. So my attempt in this video today is to shed a little light on this area, both from a biblical perspective, if you're a person of faith, and from a secular, just wisdom perspective, if faith is not your thing. And more specifically, I want to talk about oral sex, anal sex, pornography, and toys. Do they have a place in the marriage or do they not? So first, let's go biblical. And I want to start with just a verse of scripture that can give us a foundation upon which we can build. So this is in Philippians chapter 2, and here's what it says. Verses 3 through 4 say, "Do nothing from selfishness or empty conceit, but with humility consider one another as more important than yourselves. Do not merely look out for your own personal interests, but also for the interests of others." Now, when it comes to the area of sexuality, this verse is just talking about how we relate to others in general, but certainly in the area of sexuality, if your focus is you and you getting what you want and your own pleasure, then you're operating from a place of selfishness. And foundationally, we've got to enter this arena talking about selflessness. It's not about you, it's about the relationship and the connection in the relationship. So that's our foundation. First, let's talk about oral sex. The Bible really does not say anything condemning it or saying that oral sex is sin. Now, some people would say the Bible actually endorses it. If you look in the book of the Song of Solomon, I'll let you go read that love story yourself. But it talks about this back and forth between a husband and a wife. And in Song of Solomon chapter 2, you see the wife here talking about how her husband's fruit is sweet to the taste. Now, is that just a metaphor? Is that some literal description? And in Song of Solomon chapter 4, you see the husband now talking about tasting of this fruit. And so you see this garden and fruit metaphor throughout the thing. Is Scripture endorsing oral sex? It seems to, in these chapters, be describing it as occurring and being a good thing. But I'll let you go do your research on that. But biblically, oral sex, you can't find verses that say it's a sin, so you can proceed as you would like to in this area. The second area, anal sex. Again, the Bible does not specifically give verses, both either endorsing or condemning anal sex between a husband and a wife. Now, those that would say, well, what about the story of Sodom in the Old Testament? And that's where we get the word sodomy from, and that's anal sex. But that story is really addressing some homosexual behavior between men. And so if people are trying to take what was being discussed there and translating it into anal sex between a husband and a wife, I think they're moving that passage beyond its original meaning. But I'll let you go study that more. So I'll just say the Bible does not speak to whether it's okay or not okay. We're going to talk more about it just in general in just a few minutes. Pornography. Now, this is an area where I think you can find a number of different scriptures that would speak to some of this. So let me just share a couple, and then we'll talk a little bit more about these two passages. The first one is Hebrews 13:4. It says, marriage should be honored by all, and the marriage bed kept pure, for God will judge the adulterer and all the sexually immoral. Another verse, Matthew 5:28, Jesus says, but I tell you that anyone who looks at a woman lustfully has already committed adultery with her in his heart. So the Hebrews passage, you could say, some would say, that pornography is in essence bringing a third party, be it digitally, into the marriage, and so could be a form of adultery. Whether that's a stretch or not, I'll let you determine that, but you're bringing some outside people, at least viewing-wise, into the marriage bed. That may not be keeping the marriage bed pure. And then Matthew chapter 5, verse 28, Jesus saying, if you look lustfully, you've already committed adultery in your heart. Now again, this passage, if you go read it in scripture, Jesus is making some exaggerations that probably are not to be taken literal, like the very next verse, Matthew 5, verse 29, saying if your eye causes you to stumble, pluck it out and throw it away. I don't think Jesus was telling us literally gouge out your eye and throw it away. So the concept we need to understand here is Jesus is saying that our heart and our thought, our intentions are equally as important as the outward actions. So who he's talking to is the Pharisees, and the idea was simply that they were saying, listen, we haven't actually committed adultery. And he's saying, listen, if you're looking around with lust in your heart and thinking about committing adultery, then you've already done some of those things in your heart. So I think if you take those two verses and a number of other verses that talk about we should think only on things that are noble and pure and worthy, and that we should flee sexual immorality, I think there's a body of evidence in Scripture that would say that regular, intentional, unrepentant viewing of pornography in the relationship would be a lust issue and ultimately would be dishonoring God. So the last one is toys, and I'll just simply say this. The Bible does not speak to whether toys are okay or not okay in a marriage relationship, so we'll talk more about that stuff in the secular approach. So let's talk about these from a secular approach now. Now, the question we were asking ourselves in the biblical approach was, is this sin? The question we're asking in a secular wisdom approach is this wise for the relationship? So I'm assuming that somebody's coming at this. They don't have a moral view that's governed by Scripture or their faith. So the question is this wise for the relationship? And I think a foundational principle, whether you're approaching it biblically or from a secular standpoint, is still selflessness. Am I making this all about me, or am I approaching this with selflessness, saying it's not just about me, it's about the relationship and it's about my partner in the relationship? I think that's got to be our foundation by which we now evaluate these four areas. So let's go with the first area again, oral. Well, since the biblical approach seems to say it's okay, and that's the more conservative approach, we're just going to go ahead and say that the verdict is carry on, enjoy it if you like it. Number 2 is anal sex. Now, the question that we're asking here is it wise? So from a logical standpoint, it is clear that the rectum was not made or created for sexual penetration, i.e., it doesn't self-lubricate like the vagina. The materials do not stretch and adapt at the same way the vagina does. The inside wall tissues are thinner than they are in the vagina, which means they're more susceptible to being torn. And because bacteria flows through there through feces, if you have a tear in the wall, it's easy to get bacterial infection. And for those couples who are moving from anal to vaginal and back and forth, you have a high likelihood of transferring bacteria from the rectum into the vagina, which is not what you want. So from a logical standpoint, it's clear that this was not created for this purpose specifically. Now, can people find pleasure in it? Well, they share the same walls. There's lots of nerve endings in there. So absolutely people can find pleasure or they wouldn't be doing it. But the question is this the wise thing to do? And I would say that the verdict is, based on just logic and based on just wisdom, I would say if a couple's going to decide to go in this arena, that they need to do it with planning, with intentionality, that they should use caution, and this should be a real discussion. So my verdict on this one would be, use caution. Now, before I move on to porn and toys, let me just say this. If you are coercing or forcing your partner to do anything sexually they're not comfortable with, you're already starting off on the wrong foot. All that's going to do is lead to shame and resentment and bitterness and ultimately division in the relationship. So our foundational principle, as I said, is selflessness. If you're having to coerce or force your partner to do something they're not comfortable with, then you're already approaching it from a selfish standpoint. That's not going to be a win for the relationship. All right, let's talk about pornography. Again, we're not coming from a moral perspective in this approach now. We're just talking specifically, is it wise for the relationship? So let me just have you consider a couple things. So number one, comparison. If you're watching pornography and then comparing your sexual relationship to something that is not real and that they are actors, you could find yourself developing some expectations that don't meet reality, which can lead to frustration, resentment in the relationship. So you may be creating expectations of what you see being done that you now want your spouse to do that they're either not comfortable with, or because they're not an actor, they're not doing the stuff that you're seeing in pornography. So that comparison can actually hurt your sexual relationship. And then let's just talk about the psychological component. Now, I'll probably do a whole video on pornography because there's too much to go into right here. But just psychologically speaking, pornography addiction is a real thing. And if you begin to view it, it can be something you become addicted to, which can have all kinds of consequences for your life individually. Men that view it have a higher rate of depression and anxiety. Not only that, but it can impact your relationship as well. When you or your spouse find each other viewing it, what used to be something you did together, you're now doing separate, and it's causing a little bit of division in the relationship. And the other thing about it is that when you view new images, the idea of novelty actually releases more dopamine in the mind than sex with a familiar partner. And so you can actually get this novelty addiction, which then makes sex with your familiar partner who's your spouse not as satisfying anymore, and there's no end to the need for viewing new things in order to release the dopamine. So that can be a dangerous road for you to run down with your spouse. So the verdict for me would be, it's not wise. Last category, let's talk about toys. And again, we're asking the question now, is it wise? So I want to give you a couple things to think about when it comes to toys as well. The first thought is toys are something that you may have started doing with your partner, but if you're used to doing it with your partner, what's going to prevent you from doing it without your partner? And now I'm not going to run down the masturbation lane right now. That may be another video too. But if you have a relationship where there's tension or conflict in the relationship, it may now be easier to use a toy to take care of yourself than to do the hard work to repair and rebuild the relationship so that you can have sexual intimacy with your spouse. So ultimately, those toys could cause division when there's conflict and you just say, you know what, it'll be easier just to use the toy myself than it is to do the things I need to do to build the emotional intimacy and the relationship so we can enjoy sexual intimacy together. So that is always a danger. I think the second danger is that no mouth, no hand, no genitals can move at the rate a vibrator does. So when you introduce things that the body cannot reproduce, you may find yourself in a sticky situation at some point. Same thing goes with the idea of bringing a dildo in. No human being can remain as erect for infinity the way that a dildo can, and so you may get used to something that your partner cannot reproduce, which can actually make natural sex with just the two of you without toys not satisfying anymore. So I think there can be dangers in introducing toys into the relationship. So the verdict on this one for me would, again, use caution. Be wise. Don't put yourself in a situation where you get so used to something that the absence of that thing now makes it impossible for the two of you to enjoy sexual intimacy, just the two of you together. So obviously that's a lot to think about. That's a lot to talk about to fit in one video, but I wanted to address these 4 areas. I'm cautiously looking forward to hearing your comments in the comment section below. Keep it classy, keep it clean, but let's talk a little bit more about this. If you think this video would be helpful to somebody, consider sharing it with a friend, and I'll see you next time right here on Relation Shots.